Hi, I'm Rob Cavallo, and I'm a staff record producer at Warner Brothers Records, and I'm also Senior VP of A&R, and we sign things and we make records here. We're part shrink and part music guru and part technologist, part historian, musical historian, part coach. Part know-it-all, part know-nothing. You know, it's really our job to make a great record. If a record comes out and that we produce, or my name's on it, I want it to be great. I want people to go, "That's a great record. I love the songs on it. It's meaningful to me." And it starts by picking an artist that you can that you think you can actually achieve that with, and that's one of the biggest tests right there. I think it's actually really valuable to decide what your goal is in defining a great record, because some people might say a great record is that you want to have, I want to sell 5 million records. I want it to be a hit, you know, or I just want it to, I want to sell 80,000 records and have it be a jazz classic or something like that, or I want to push the boundaries of rock and roll and I want to make, you know, Kid A by Radiohead, and we're not concerned with necessarily how it's going to sell. We're just concerned with that we're pushing the envelope or pushing the boundaries of creativity in music. So there's lots of concerns in terms of what great is. It's actually very, I think, important as a producer to be clear. It's your responsibility to be realistic in terms of what you're spending and what your goal is, so that the artist knows what to expect and you know what to expect. Then the record company knows what to expect, because you're going to end up really being the guy between, the A&R guy is kind of between the band and the record company, but I actually think the producer in a way is even more responsible, because they're the hands-on person, they're the one who's also taking the money. They're personally getting in advance, and they're basically personally spending the money with the band on a day-to-day basis. Every day you go into, let's say, Ocean Way Recording, and you've got an engineer at $1,200 a day, a bunch of rental gear, another $500, and the studio costs $2,000. You're up at $3,000 a day. Did you spend your $3,000 wisely that day? And did you spend it wisely over a course of a couple of months? Mm-hmm. Those are important things. You're not really helping the artist, obviously, if you're irresponsible in that area. I would say if you, so that basically you have to know why you're making the record. Mm-hmm. And creativity always comes first. Music comes first. But I also think, as a producer of a movie, you're responsible for the money as well as you're responsible for the creative. It's actually being the producer and the director of a movie is what a producer of a record does. In the end result, even though I've gone through the gamut of some of those things and still want to even try, what I really was doing that always worked for me was follow the passion that I had. And the more passion I had for any particular music, the more success it seemed to bring me. So I learned that lesson very well when I was a younger A&R guy, because I signed some things that this is the mistake of a young A&R guy. Let's sign something because everybody else wants it and we think it's going to make money. Well, that's usually a recipe for disaster. It's usually not the thing. Especially in my case. It turned out that I wasn't very good at, like, let's say, picking a hit or picking something that I thought other people would like. But what I did find out I was good at was picking something that I really liked and had passion for, and then making that be as great as it could be. That's where I ended up being successful. As soon as it's very subtle, really, in a way. It sounds subtle, or maybe it sounds big, I don't know, but as soon as I changed that mindset, immediately had success. The first thing that happened was I worked with a band called the Muffs, and I made a 4-song demo. The president of Warner Brothers Records at the time gave me like $2,000, and I brought him the 4 songs after we were done, and he said, "Right, sign them. That's it. Those are the first 4 songs on the record you're going to make." And the next thing you know, I was a real record producer for a major, And then because of that record, and it was something that was real to me, there was another band that heard about this record and liked it, and they basically asked me to sign them and asked me to produce them, and that was Green Day, and we made Dookie, and that was my second record I ever produced, and we sold 15 million copies. So the idea, so for me, obviously, the idea of following my passion made sense, you know. And it spawned a whole sort of trend. I mean, there wasn't pop punk before that, before Green Day. There was, you know, sort of punk inspired things or whatever to a certain degree, but nobody had really actually had to find a new style. And that was February of '94 that came out. And you know, I'm sure the viewers out there can find, you know, they'll find at least 20 bands that have followed in those footsteps after that point. It's actually an interesting thing you bring up A&R producing combination, because it's both the greatest thing and potentially the most dangerous and worst thing. I started out, well, first just thinking, my God, I have to make money somehow. What am I going to do? And music was really more of a hobby. I was in bands and stuff like that. So I thought that maybe A&R would be right for me. So I knocked on the door here, and they interviewed me, and lo and behold, they actually said to me, "We think you're a producer." Matter of fact, the guy who had this office before me was Ted Templeman, one of my heroes and mentors, and I love him. He's fantastic, and if you check his list of credits, you'll realize that he was one of the best producers, greatest producers that ever lived. And they saw something in me that said, you know, this guy's a producer. And I didn't even recognize it at that point. And so they liked me, and they brought me on staff. And they gave me some things to produce, but I didn't feel like I could win with those things. So at that time, Michael Austin, who was the head of A&R, said to me, "Why don't you learn A&R first? Why don't you learn the business and get acclimated with the idea of the record company?" And so for the next 5 years, I worked under him and the whole A&R staff, and I went to the A&R meetings, and I actually learned the business. My prior sort of pre-programming was to be a producer. That was my own personal study, and I realized that was in me. But the training I got from Warner Brothers was as a record executive. Now, I can't tell you how rare that is. That almost doesn't exist anymore, because it's very hard to learn how to be a producer, and it's very hard to learn the record business, both. A&R and production is very rare to do at the same time, because they actually are almost exclusive mindsets. One does not help the other. As a matter of fact, one detracts from the other. And I've talked about this with the great Lenny Waronker many times, and other producers and A&R people, because if you're in the mindset of a producer, you're taking a band, and you have to pick them like an A&R guy does, in the sense that you think that they're good, obviously, but you really have to think about what's possible. With a producer's mindset, you bend music, you grow music, you basically you form a very tight relationship with the artist. I mean, this is how I do it. I form a tight relationship with the artist, and I try to pull out songs out of them. I try to make them sing about stuff that they've never thought that they could sing about. Because I've recognized the fact that the emotional content of a record is actually what sells the record. It actually is what makes it unique. So, like, if I'm doing Green Day, or if I'm doing Goo Goo Dolls, or if I'm doing Fleetwood Mac, or whoever it is that I'm doing, I want it to be the most Fleetwood Mac it can be. I want the greatness of that particular artist to come out. Now, imagine if you were an A&R guy, and you were basically looking at everybody with that mindset. You'd want to sign everybody. You'd fall in love with everything that you looked at, you know? And that's really impossible, because A&R is it's really hardcore decision making. Now I've been in the mindset of an A&R person and not in the mindset of a producer. Right now I'm mostly in the mindset, on a yearly basis, I'm in the mindset of a producer. But like I said, I was trained for those 5-6 years, and I was doing hardcore A&R. I could tell you, you could say, name 10 bands in Austin, Texas right now, and I would be able to tell you 20. you could say to me, name the 30 best, just bubbling under, sticking their heads out, modern rock bands on the East Coast, and I would be able to tell you, and I'd be able to say, and you could ask me, which bands do you think Columbia are close to making a deal with, and I'd be able to tell you that too, and not only would I be able to tell you about 200 bands at any given week, but I would also be able to, if you're good, you're deciding why one singer is better than another, or you're deciding why one guy's lyric has more, or why that band is more special as a unit, because that's the mindset that it takes. And then when it comes time to really make the marriage of what it's like to sell a band, to sign a band, it's like you have to sell them, but you're signing a band. It's almost like getting married. You have to know exactly why you love them, and exactly why you think they're the ones that are going to make it, and why you have the passion to tie them to you, to put your name on it. And the only way I think you can actually do that is if you've done due diligence in scouting everything and knowing everything. And that way, that's how you'll pick, the next Van Halen. I was actually the last guy to come out of the system, which I started to describe to you before. I was the last guy to come out of that system. And there was a camaraderie of music, and there was a weekly A&R meeting where the language of music, when I mean the language of music, I mean the language of how to talk about music, was used and was grown every Tuesday. And we would come in, there would be probably 10, 12 people, best A&R people in the world, and these are people that signed every band from Dire Straits to Television to Devo to, Seymour Stein was there, to the Pretenders, to the Sex Pistols, to, as I said, the Doobie Brothers and Van Halen, and wonderful people like, and Randy Newman was signed. This is an A&R meeting that as far as I'm concerned should go down in history as probably one of the classiest A&R meetings, it built Warner Brothers Records. And this is what impressed me most as a young guy when I first went in was that, we've all been fans of music for many, many years, and music would enter your brain through your ears, and you'd feel things. And you'd enjoy those feelings, but imagine actually being able to use language to talk about them so you could identify why that makes you feel, like you want to jump up and down and dance, or why it makes you feel sullen or sorry, or whatever it is that however the music wants you to makes you feel. And then to apply that language so that you could actually appropriately dissect or determine whether or not that music was working, determine whether or not how the music was broken, or if it was close to working, or if it was missing certain elements. And that's what these guys did for me. And they would give me the assignment. I'd get these sheets just that looked like this, except they had little lines on it with certain questions to ask. And so you'd get a demo, and you'd fill it in. And filling it in was basically an exercise in the discipline of learning how to talk about music. And so what happened was, I watched these masters talking about a demo or a song that they would just hear, and they would be so right on. And I recognized that they were talking about the feelings that I felt way deep down in about the record that I couldn't identify yet, but they taught me. But here's the amazing part. After a couple of years, it dawned on me that what they were really doing, besides debating on the quality of a record and whether or not they should sign it, it was also the most intense training in the world for actually how to talk to an artist. Because what happens next is you sign your artist, and now you have to talk to them. And as an A&R guy, do you have the ability to talk to an artist and make them be better? What do you say? I don't like that chorus, man. The artist looks at you and says, well, what do you know about it? Right? But if your language and your idea of why the chorus might not be functioning is expressed, all of a sudden the artist respects you. It's expressed in a way that is not offensive, but actually has value and substance. All of a sudden your artist goes, "Oh, I know what you mean. I was kind of thinking that too. How do you think we could beat that problem?" Now you have a real A&R relationship with an artist that respects you because he knows that you know. And that's the essence of both A&R and production, is gaining the artist's respect and talking to them about their music, and then really deciding together how you can help their career, and what you can do, and what their career can and should be. Because artists don't always know. Sometimes they know exactly, and sometimes they're confused. One of the hardest things in the world to do is actually to have an artist continue to make good records over a course of 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Most artists can't do it. However, an A&R guy or producer can be instrumental in the longevity of an artist just by the fact of the conversations he has with them. It's a very powerful position. And I have to say, it's a great life. And that is what I think they taught me. That was of an unbelievable nature. It was invaluable. And certainly they taught me all the other things, like, how to sign a band and how much money to offer, and, all the mundanities that are, well, to me they're mundane now because I've been doing it for 20 years. But they certainly are, those are all disciplines unto themselves that have to be learned. It's a very complex thing, and the game is always changing because, just look back 10 years ago. The hits don't sound like they do today, as they did then. And it's just a great creative format. I just really love it. I'm tempted to say the silly things like the long hours and when you're banging your head against when you can't get a sound and the song's not working. But that's actually probably not the hardest thing. I think that those things are hard. I think the hardest thing is, over time, knowing that you're going to have to tell, at some point, your artist that they're not cutting it, and that they have to do something about it, and they have to search within themselves, and you have to have those conversations, because artists to me are always like, they're special people. I actually admire what they do. They actually put their life and their souls on the line. They can't. Most artists I know can't do anything else but be artists. It's just not in their DNA. And so I admire them because they're basically saying the way I'm going to earn my breakfast is to sing you a song. And what a big, scary bet that is. That's a bigger and scarier bet than I would want to take myself. At least I can go from record to record to record and find one, right? They go, I'm taking one bet and it's on me. And I have such respect for that. So when the time comes that sometimes you have to have that heart to heart, and you have to tell them that they're either dropped or that they've got to reevaluate their voice in terms of what point of view position they're writing from, because it's not working. That's the hardest conversation. The arrival of internet piracy, which is just really having way more of a devastating effect on our industry than most people see on a day-to-day basis, certainly has made it very difficult. Record company rosters have shrunk. Record company budgets have shrunk. Record company personnel have shrunk. Record companies can't make the same money on the same quality CD that they used to, and they just can't do it because it's being pirated all around the world. I think there was something like the order of 15 billion song files traded last year. That's 2006. 15 billion songs were traded illegally on the net. And one side of it is you can go, well, that's great. It shows that there's demand, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, it also shows you that there were I can point to 40 people whose cars are not in the parking lot now because of that. And I can show you a roster that has shrunk, and artists that would have had maybe a better shot or a bigger budget, or a budget at all, to have made a record that now they don't. So to say it's had an effect on all of us in this industry is almost an understatement. Now, at the same time, do I think that that's just the way of the world, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, a lot of it's due to the responsibility of the leaders of our industry. I wish that they would have done more research and development. I wish that we started iTunes 10 years ago. We didn't. Our original position was that we shunned the CD. Wait, we're putting a master into the marketplace. People are going to copy it. Well, turned out that fear was realized even worse than they ever could have imagined. But what were the steps that anyone was taking to put a DRM or a digital rights management tool onto the first CDs, or where was the millions of dollars that we had extra lying around 10 years ago? Where was that put into any research and development into new technologies or new things that could have been forward thinking in terms of our industry? No, the technology industry basically took care of all that for us, and basically are now using us, because in the world of digital content, music is the easiest player to hit on every time. And the reason why is simply because it's the smallest unit. It's the smallest amount of content that you can send over the net that actually feels satisfying and complete to a human. So it really comes down to things that are just very simple, and so yeah, am I blaming our as much as I love our past presidents and our past chairmen? Yes, I do. And do I think they're great record makers? Yes, I do. Do I think they got caught in a situation where thinking ahead was something that wasn't their strength? Absolutely. I think that was the case too. So now we have to live in this new world. Ironically, I do think in the future that the technology is yet the same evil that sort of plagues us now is also our savior. It'll be the thing that eventually, when copyrights are reinforced and a new experience comes over the net that can't be easily pirated, then our music will begin to earn the value that it actually intrinsically has, and that people have put on it. They're not stealing 15 billion files because they don't like it. Clearly, it has value. So now our future, it's a very interesting thing. I think that in some ways, our industry is going to find itself starting from scratch. In some ways, and in what form it's going to take is going to be very interesting. Most people think it's going to be a pairing of audio and visual together through through the net that'll be highly interactive, and a relationship between a fan and a band will be much more direct. But for those of you out there who kind of know what I'm talking about, I don't know what I'm talking about. I mean, what I mean is that I don't know exactly what form or shape it'll take. I don't think anybody might know that, except maybe some scientists who might be playing around with some artists. They're having a conference in Aspen, and then they'll figure it out. If I was, like, let's say 18 or 20 years old and I wanted to produce records, I would do actually what I did when I was 18 or 20 years old. First of all, I was in a band for sure, or a number of bands. I set up a home studio where, I went out, a home studio where I could record the kinds of bands or the kinds of music that I like to do. So in my case, I had the drummer in the bathroom, and I had the singer in another room, and the guitars in the closet, and whatever. So, and then I set about the process of actually recording bands, because that's actually what you want to do. So you practice it, and you get good at it until you actually, and I record them for free. I would go out and find a band. I'd go down to the Sunset Strip, go to the Troubadour, and see a band that I like, and I'd say, hey, you guys are great. Do you have a demo tape? If they said yes or no, or if they said yes, I go, well, is it new or old? And then they would say, well, it was old. I'd say, I want to make a demo with you. I'll pay for everything. Come to my house Monday through Thursday next week, and we're going to record 3 or 4 songs. I'll take you out for drinks now. That's the kind of thing I did. That's why when I go back and I tell the story about how I got signed here, well, one of the things, or hired, I should say, one of the things is that I had made 2 demo tapes that they had listened to, and they basically said, this guy's got something. Now, I had made probably a good 10, 15 tapes before that. And before that, of my own bands, I made hundreds of thousands of probably made 1,000 recordings. I mean, I remade in my bedroom Tomorrow Never Knows by the Beatles probably like 3 times. I did songs by the Tubes. I did songs by the Clash. I played every instrument. I recorded. I experimented with microphones, microphone placement. I experimented with overdubs and reverbs and delays, and talked to a million artists. And I just was living it as a producer beforehand. So by the time I was actually on the other side of this very desk, and back then it was cassettes. I came in and Ted Templeman put the cassette in, and he listened, and he goes, "Hey, that's good." I was like, "Whoa, he thinks it's good." But I had been, when I think back on it, of course I was shocked and happy, and it was amazing. But before that, I was like, when I think about it, I go, well, you know what? I actually made it so that I had a chance for it to be good, because I had recorded 1,000 songs before that, and and it tried different mixing technique. I mean, I did everything you could try. So that's what I would do. I would pick bands and record them somehow. Beg, borrow, steal studio time. Make your own studio at your house. Put yourself in the role of producer. Assume that you're a producer right now. Go, I'm a rock producer, or I'm a jazz producer, or I'm a pop producer. If you're a rock producer, go out, get your room together, get your mics together, and when you're ready, invite a band over. And if you're too shy to do that right away, then play everything yourself and record yourself making a rock song. And which I certainly did. So many times it was embarrassing, especially the early ones. And then if you're a pop producer, then or if you want to be Dr. Dre, then start making beats. Make 10 beats a day. Figure out how to get the fattest samples you can get. Try to define, if you say, I like what Little John does, and I like what Jay-Z does, and I like what this guy does, and I want to throw in a little Will.I.am, then go sit down and beat those guys. And then just 2 things are going to happen. One is you're going to make yourself better, and you're going to actually be doing something that will be of value and make you money one day. The other thing will happen is you will realize how far you have to go, because those guys are great. They're really good, and they've paid their dues, and they're talented. You have to find out if you are talented. One of the first things you got to look for is, does it move you? Simply that. Can you take your eyes away from it? I find I can dismiss a singer or a guitar player almost with my eyes before my ears, because it's your natural inclination to walk into a club and say, well, these guys are loud, it's fun, or these guys are making a sound, but if you find yourself going, I don't love that singer, or I don't love the sound of his voice, or I don't think that guitar player is doing anything that new. So you got to decide if you're passionate about it, if it moves you. Then I go through a bit of a checklist. You can go through and say things like, is that guitar player doing something new? Or is the chemistry between, let's say there's a 4-piece band, and there's guitar, bass, drums, and a lead singer. And you go, is there chemistry there? Are they making a sound? Are they playing in a style that you haven't heard before? Remember, I'm the guy that likes to sign things that are really new and take the risk on a new sound, on a new thing. You go, is that something great? Like you go back and you go, you ever listen to Led Zeppelin 1? You go, holy cow. Even when you hear the stories about Led Zeppelin when they first got in the room together, they even knew it. They were like, my God, we're just playing old blues standards, but we're creaming them like nobody's ever creamed them before. This is amazing. So I look for the chemistry between the players. I look for a great voice. I look for something that is pushing a musical envelope to a new place. And then I look to see, both at the beginning and again at the end, if I feel passion, if it's moving me emotionally. The first thing I would say is look to yourself and see where your passion for music is, like to create music, is coming from. And have it define who you are. So you'll be, it's a weird sort of arc of starting with who your influences are and then transcending them. Because let's face it, in the Beatles, like you can look at the Beatles, you can say, well, you hear Little Richard, and you hear some Chuck Berry, and you hear some Everly Brothers, and you definitely hear Buddy Holly. You hear the Everly Brothers. You know, you hear these different influences. You can hear the harmonies. You can hear the whoo. You know, you can hear the idea of some of the chord changes of Buddy Holly. You know, you can hear these things. They want it to be sort of like, it's classic story told. They sort of had a skiffle influence from the north of England, and they had an R&B, black rock and roll influence from the south of America. Not South America, but south, Texas and blues and Mississippi. And they stuck that together. I mean, I always kind of thought that if you took Fats Domino, Blueberry Hill, and you took Love Me Do, they weren't really too far off on the rock scale. They were kind of in the same place in terms of the way the phrasing was in the vocal. But what did the Beatles do after? They transcended. They took all those elements, homogenized them into themselves, and then transcended. And that was the Beatles' invasion. And then, my God, what did they do after that? Just a couple of years. Imagine, just a few years later, 4 years later, they were making Revolver and Sgt. Pepper. And they transcended that art, their initial inspiration, and transcended even farther into musical territory that had not been explored before. And what do we do as music fans? We put them at the top. We put the Beach Boys Brian Wilson did the same thing. These are the... that's what's interesting to me about when an artist comes in. You can almost tell, I can tell pretty quick, if an artist is a guy who, let's say, looks at the modern rock charts and says, oh, I can do that. Or they, and maybe he is actually a pretty good guy. He might be a good mimic at that kind of stuff. But when the guy comes in, or girl, who comes in and says, they don't actually ever really say, I'm going to do something new and different. They just automatically are new and different because they have that fire in them. Those are the guys you sign. It's hard to spot. A lot of times the first feeling you might have when you're in the presence of somebody who's really great is that you won't really know it. You'll just feel slightly uncomfortable. because in a way they know something that you don't, and they're kind of testing you to see if you're somebody that can hang with them based on and can help their vision of things. It's very interesting stuff. I don't know if anybody's ever said this stuff before. Sort of in public. But I can tell you this. I would gather to say that these are the kinds of things that like the real record men that we know of. These are the kinds of things that they talk about.